There's a question here about the subconscious mind and manifesting. It's kind of long, so I'm not going to read all of it. But it says, the subconscious mind does not know the difference between perceived real or imagined. An interesting connection between perceived real and imagined is manifesting. To manifest something in reality, it is highly effective to imagine it already completed, and the subconscious seems to drive the conscious being to bring about the imagined reality until it matches the perceived reality. Why is that, I wonder? There is a reason for this mechanism which perhaps is not beyond our comprehension. But this is the problem with radical non-duality. It directs people away from even trying to understand. Well, whether it's radical non-duality or other forms of spiritual teachings, I would say that if we ask ourselves a simple question, why are we here? Why do we exist? I think the best answer that I have ever come up with is that we exist because we have the potential to expand our sense of self, and we expand our sense of self by realizing how our minds work. In other words, we're conscious beings. We have a mind that has certain capabilities. But we were not brought up in our modern societies with any deep understanding of the mind's capabilities. And that's why, for me personally, ever since I found the spiritual path when I was 18, it's always been clear to me that the spiritual path, the purpose of life, is really about self-mastery, mastering the mind. And so it's very true that part of this understanding of the mind, people seeking to understand the capabilities of mind and experimenting with them, is this phenomenon of manifesting things. Now, I've given two talks where I talk about the law of attraction and the law of assumption. So you might want to look those up because I talk about this in there too. But what I want to say here is that I myself had spent several years where I was really into this manifesting things. And I understand the idea that you have to get yourself in a state of mind where you are accepting that something is manifest, even though it isn't there physically. But the problem is that I have seen, both in myself and in many people I met, is that there is a limit to how far this can be taken. And it's very important to understand the background for it. And so let me put it this way. I've said in several videos that the universe can be compared to a reality simulator or the cosmic mirror. In other words, what we experience as the physical circumstances around us is a reflection of what we project out with our minds. So you are projecting out an impulse, and what comes back to you reflects that. And this is a general principle. It's a spiritual law, you can say. Because the universe is set up to facilitate our growth in self-awareness. So obviously, if you go into whatever it is, radical non-duality, Neo-Advaita, you're bypassing that whole thing. You're saying, I don't need to learn about the mind because basically the mind is my enemy. I need to return to pure awareness where I have no self. But if you're not in that frame of mind, then you can ask yourself these questions. First of all, why is it that many people try this manifestation and they don't get the results they want? And I would say that on an immediate level, it's because most people don't fully realize that we have the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And that you can go into this positive mental attitude, law of attraction, law of assumption, and you can decide with your outer mind, with your conscious mind, this is what I want. And then you create a mental image in the conscious mind that you are projecting into the cosmic mirror. But you are not realizing that you have another mental image in the subconscious mind that might be projecting a different image. So what's very common is that most of us have been brought up to see ourselves as having limited amounts of money. Our parents had limited amounts of money, and we've simply grown up to think that there's a limit to how much money you can have. And we have accepted this in our subconscious mind, and this is what I call these subconscious selves that I talk about in a lot of videos. So we have these subconscious selves in the subconscious mind. It's like you can say we have an image there, and a part of the energy we receive from our higher selves is streaming through that image, being projected into the cosmic mirror. So now we get this, we find this teaching that talks about, oh, you can manifest anything you want. And so now you're creating an image in the conscious mind that you are projecting out. So now you have two images you're projecting. And which one is the strongest? What if you have had this poverty image for several lifetimes? Because look back at history and how many past societies were poor, you've grown up with this. So this is one thing. So in order to really make manifesting work, you have to look into the subconscious mind, look at the subconscious selves you have. Now, however, it is very true that you can put yourself in a frame of mind where you are focused on abundance rather than lack. And this I experienced myself, that there came a point where I made a conscious decision to not focus on what I didn't have, but instead being grateful for what I had. And when I made that shift, very quickly I started having more money coming in, even though I wasn't really doing anything different. So this is valid enough, but still I also realized over the time after I had made that switch that I still had these limiting beliefs that I needed to look at and resolve. And it was only when I resolved those that I actually really started getting into a point where I didn't worry about having enough money anymore. So there is that limitation there. You can project one thing with a conscious mind and another thing with a subconscious mind, and you really need to bring yourself into a point where you're only projecting out one vision. It's a coherent vision. Like Jesus said, when thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. So when your vision is not divided, when it's united, when it's single, then you are much more effective at manifesting. But the other thing I would say about this is that in order to understand the limitations of manifestation, you have to be careful you don't be too concrete. I've seen so many people over the years who get into this treasure mapping. So you think that you create this treasure map where you take these pictures of the house you want to own, the car you want to have, and you're focusing on that every day, projecting this out there and accepting you already have it. And many people get disappointed over this because they don't get exactly what they are trying to manifest. And I've seen people who after some time, they just gave up on the whole thing. They thought it was just a hoax. But there is, as I said, there's a sound principle there. It's just that there is, for most of us, there is a limit to what we can manifest physically because we have to look at the society we're living in. And we have to realize, as I've said in several videos, that planet Earth is an unnatural planet where the collective consciousness is very low. And so if you live in a very poor country, it's not realistic to make a treasure map where you own a $1 million house, for example. It's setting yourself up for disappointment. So that's why I'm saying we have to look at context. And what I have found over the years is simply this, that I don't manifest specific, or I don't visualize specific things as much as I manifest this general feeling, because I realize what is it I really want. I took a look at myself and said, okay, I grew up in a working class family. My parents didn't have their own business, they both worked. They had enough money for daily things, but they never really imagined they could have a lot of money. It was just not in their mindset. And so I knew I grew up with this. And so I realized I also, in my subconscious mind, I had accepted certain limitations. And for a while I was trying to visualize this, I would have more money than my parents. But then I came to a point where I asked myself, okay, but if I were to have more money, what would I have to do? I would basically have to go into the business world, start a business, or start investing. And I realized that if I wanted to do this, it would require time and attention. I would have to put a lot of attention on it. And I just simply realized that's not what I want to do. Because I'm a spiritual person, I want to focus on my spiritual growth, and then when I started doing my spiritual service, I wanted to focus on that. So what I realized was that I had actually had this idea that you see in many people out there in the world, that only if I have a certain amount of money can I feel I have enough. And I realized that this was putting the cart before the horse. Because I was actually saying, mind you this, I was actually saying, when I get a certain amount of money, then I can feel at peace about money. And I realized this was actually the opposite of what I have been trying to do with manifesting. Because when you get into the whole treasure mapping thing, you're focused on a physical result. You want to manifest the house, the car, or you want to manifest a certain amount of money. Because you're thinking that when you have that, you will feel whatever you think, happy, at peace, fulfilled. But you see, the whole idea of manifesting is you start with a state of mind, and then the physical results follow. If you really understand what manifesting is about, it's really this very simple principle. First comes the mind, then comes the physical. First you change your mind, then the physical results will follow. So what I realized was that when it came to money, it wasn't that I wanted a certain amount. I wanted to have a situation where I had enough money coming in that I didn't need to worry about it, and I could focus most of my attention on doing my spiritual work. And that manifested for me in 2002, and I've been able to, by God's grace, live that way ever since. And since then I haven't worried about money. I don't care how much money I have as long as I have enough to have a roof over my head and so forth and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that if you have to accept that you live in a certain context here. You live in a certain society. If it's a poor society, is it really realistic that you become very rich? But even if you live in a rich country, what will it take to manifest the kind of money you see people having? Well, if you didn't inherit it, you will have to do something to manifest, to earn the money, which is, most cases, start a business or invest. And do you want to spend your time and attention on this? So that's why I'm saying, instead of manifesting a concrete physical result, I switched to focus on manifesting a state of mind, taking command over my state of mind, so that I simply accepted I have enough money. And this became a state of mind where I really experienced and lived that, but I was also doing work that was a service to other people, providing something of value to other people, so that there was a physical vehicle where the money could come in. I wasn't just sitting there looking at a treasure map expecting the orange to drop in my turban. So this is an important thing. But then I think it's also very important to realize that when you say that Earth is a reality simulator or a cosmic mirror or a learning environment, there are two aspects of this. One is that we learn how the mind works in terms of how we can use the mind to manifest something physically. But the other is that we learn that there are things we don't need to manifest physically because what we really want is a certain experience. So that means that you can ask yourself, what do you really want in life? And many people think, I want money because that will give me peace of mind. But you can look at billionaires and ask yourself, do they have peace of mind? They have more money, they couldn't even spend it for the rest of their lives if they spend it on something personal. They couldn't spend it all. But do they have peace of mind? And so if you're a spiritual person, you can say, well, what do I really want? Do I want peace of mind? And then you say, well, the only way to get peace of mind is to work on the mind. Because it's backwards to think that by manifesting a certain outer circumstance, you will get peace of mind. So therefore, you can focus on using the spiritual teachings and tools, whatever appeals to you, to achieve that sense of inner peace. And then you can accept that whatever manifests physically is what's practically possible in your particular situation. Because as I said, the Earth is an unnatural planet that has a certain density of matter, very low level of collective consciousness, and there's simply a limit to how much you can manifest. You also, as a spiritual person, of course, you can look at billionaires and you can say, well, how had they manifested all that money? It's always by exploiting other people. And therefore, do you really want to do that? No, of course you don't as a spiritual person. So I'm just saying, there has to be, I understand that it can be seductive to think that we can manifest anything we visualize. And there is a reality behind it in the sense that, yes, we have the ability to formulate a mental image, to project it on the base energy that makes up the world, and it can become physically manifest. However, we have to realize that what we are really here to achieve is not physical results, but a state of mind, a state of self-mastery over our minds primarily. So what I came to is that I realized that when you understand the Earth as a reality simulator, you realize that the primary purpose of being in the simulator is to have experiences. And therefore, instead of focusing on manifesting certain physical results, you focus on having experiences, because it's like you need to have a certain experience to have enough of it. And then you can give it up and move on to something else. You can see people who, in their younger years, they were focused on living a certain lifestyle. Let's say, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or trying to achieve money. But you see some of these people, as they got older, they shifted. And it was like now they started focusing on their spiritual growth because they'd had enough of that experience. So what I realized is that you can actually look at yourself and you can say you have a desire for something. But do you have to have the physical thing in order to fulfill the desire? And this means that you can now start looking at maybe some desires are anchored in these subconscious selves. And you can actually, by working on your subconscious mind, by making these selves conscious, you can look at that behind this raw desire, for example, there is an illusion. Where you might think, for example, you have a subconscious self that projects at you that when you have enough money, you will feel at peace. But this is because this subconscious self is based on the illusion that you are not complete in yourself. You can't be complete in yourself. And when you look at this illusion and see that it is an illusion, then you can realize that you will actually never feel complete by having anything in this world, whether it's money or something else. Because the only thing that will make you feel complete is a connection to your higher self. That is the only thing that will complete you and give you peace of mind. And then you can come to a point where you see that this is just a self that's projecting at you. And you may have stepped into it, and so therefore you experience that, oh, you feel incomplete, and if I only had enough money, I would feel complete. But you can let go of the whole illusion, you can dissolve it. And then you can focus on this oneness with your I Am Presence, and when you experience that, you will experience the peace of mind, the inner fulfillment, and you can let the desire for money go without having to have the physical circumstances. Because again, we live in a world that has a certain density, and that means for everything you want physically, there's a price to pay. Meaning time, attention, energy. So what I'm saying is, you might be able to manifest lots of money, but it could take you 20, 30 years to do it. And maybe that's not really in your life plan, and maybe that would delay your spiritual growth. So if you could go in and work with the mind and overcome that desire, resolve it so you don't have it anymore, the self is dissolved, you can make much faster progress, and you will much more quickly come to the point. Instead of taking 20 years, it could take you few months, weeks, days to resolve this and move on. So I think that's what's I guess my conclusion here would be that any kind of spiritual teaching that tells you you don't need to look at yourself, you don't need to look into your subconscious mind, you can just bypass it and focus on something else, it's just not going to get you there. It's not the most efficient way to go about it. And in a sense, it fools you into thinking you can get somewhere without looking at the beam in your own eye.